I don't know if anyone will believe me, but I need to share this story because it changed the course of my life in ways I never expected. It started on a rainy Saturday afternoon when I stumbled upon an old, dusty bookstore that seemed to have materialized out of nowhere. The kind of place where you could smell the pages and the history wafting through the air. I stepped in, the creaky door announcing my entrance like an unwelcome guest. As I wandered through the aisles, I felt drawn to a particular section, one that I usually wouldn't pay much attention to. It was the occult and horror section. Most of the titles were predictable, but one caught my eye, a nondescript, tattered book with no author listed, just a spine that seemed to shimmer faintly under the dim light. I picked it up, feeling an unsettling chill creep along my skin, but curiosity took over. I wanted to know what secrets this book held. I flipped through the pages, and strange illustrations filled with grotesque imagery jumped out at me. It felt alive, almost as if it was beckoning me to delve deeper. I decided to buy it, against my better judgment, thinking it would be an interesting conversation piece more than anything. That night, I sank into my couch, cup of tea in hand, and started reading. The first few pages were a mixture of obscure knowledge about ancient rituals and cryptic poetry, but as I continued, it morphed into something more unsettling. Each page seemed to call out to me, whispering promises of knowledge and power, or perhaps danger. I found myself unable to put it down despite the gnawing sense of dread that settled in my stomach. As the clock ticked past midnight, I reached a passage that seemed to come alive. It spoke of a ritual, a simple incantation that had the power to manifest one's deepest desires. I knew it was nonsense, but the idea was tantalizing, the possibility of having anything I wanted. Driven by impulse, I gathered the items the book recommended, a candle, a mirror, and a small sliver of my own hair. I felt ridiculous, but I convinced myself it was just a harmless experiment. Once I set everything up, I began to recite the words from the book. A strange wind swirled through my living room, extinguishing the candle in an instant. I halted mid-sentence, dread crawling up my spine. But something pushed me to continue. I whispered the words again, a sense of urgency filling my voice. As if responding to my plea, the mirror began to ripple like water, distorting my reflection. Suddenly, the world around me went black. I panicked, feeling disoriented and trapped in some void. And then I was thrown back into my living room. Shaken, I stared at the mirror, which now gleamed with an unsettling light. It was then that I noticed something in the reflection, a shadowy figure just behind me. I whipped around, but there was nothing there. Just the empty room, the wind howling outside like the harbinger of something terrible. I decided to ignore it, assuming it was just my tired mind playing tricks on me. The following days, however, were not as I had hoped. At first, small things changed, a promotion at work, unexpected good weather, even an old friend who had ghosted me reached out. It felt like the ritual was working, and I was riding on a high, believing I had done something extraordinary. But then came the price. Each day, a deeper sense of anxiety crept in, like a shadow slowly consuming the vibrant colors of my life. I found myself hearing whispers at night, soft, sinister murmurs that echoed through the walls. I convinced myself I was merely stressed, but within a week, bizarre things began to happen. Animals would follow me, their eyes wide and frantic. I would see fleeting glimpses of the figure I had seen in the mirror, lurking just out of sight. And then one night, as I lay in bed, the whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices calling my name. I bolted upright, fear gripping my heart, and as I glanced at the mirror, I felt a chilling realization. The shape had formed into something unmistakable, my own face but twisted, contorted into a grotesque smile. I couldn't take it anymore, so I decided to confront it, to take everything back. Armed with the knowledge I'd acquired from the book, I prepared another ritual, one that the text hinted at as a cleansing ceremony. I lit the candle and faced the mirror, chanting the words I fervently hoped would undo my mistake. The air grew heavy, humming with energy, and as I finished, I saw the figure reappear, just behind me, reaching out as if trying to drag me in. Panic surged within me, but I had to remain steadfast. "Leave me alone!" I screamed, my voice trembling. The shadows swirled around me, battling against the light from the candle. For a moment, it felt as if everything was suspended in time, the light and dark clashing violently as I stood frozen before the mirror. And then, in a blinding flash, everything went quiet. I blinked and found myself staring at my own reflection, unharmed, the room eerily calm. Believing I was finally free, I turned away and put the book back on the shelf. But just as the tension began to ease, something unexpected caught my eye. My own reflection was still smiling that twisted smile, buried underneath my image. It stared back at me with eyes filled with gleeful malice. For weeks after, I felt its presence lurking, each moment heavy with the weight of what I had unleashed. My life became a hellscape, filled with distorted reflections and whispers that never let me rest. I finally had to face the truth: some books should remain closed, their knowledge left untouched. And though I returned to that bookstore to warn the owner about the cursed tome, to my utter horror, it had vanished into the ether, absorbed into the very shadows it had conjured. It's been months since that fateful night, and now I live in constant fear, forever glancing into mirrors, terrified that one day that twisted smile will break free, dragging me back into the darkness as it rises to take my place and fulfill its own hungry desires. So, please, if you ever come across a book that calls to you with a whisper or a fleeting shimmer, think twice before you open it. You never know what might be lurking just behind the pages, or within your own reflection. When I faced my fears and tried an extreme sport, I've always been terrified of heights. The thought of standing on the edge of a cliff makes my stomach churn, and looking out of a plane window leaves me borderline catatonic. I'm not talking about the normal fear, I mean a bone-deep terror that roots me in place. But a couple of weeks ago, I found myself in a situation that spiraled out of control, and it was all because of a dare from my friends. They had convinced me to join them for a weekend getaway at a remote cabin in the woods, promising laughter, adventure, and a break from my mundane routine. I hesitated, but the idea of being left out gnawed at me, so I reluctantly agreed, thinking the peaceful atmosphere would help me settle my nerves. Little did I know that this trip would push me beyond my limits in ways I never could have imagined. The moment we arrived, I felt the excitement buzzing in the air. My friends were buzzing about trying new things. They started talking about bungee jumping, which made my palms sweat and my throat tighten. I tried to change the subject, but the more they joked and teased, the more I could feel myself being cornered. I'll never forget the look on my best friend, Mark's face when he dared me to try it. "Come on. It'll be fun. Just think about it, one leap and you'll face your fears," he laughed, but his laughter echoed in my mind like a menacing taunt. Heart pounding, I knew I should have walked away, but instead, I found myself nodding, a stupid grin plastered on my face. It was only after I said yes that the reality kicked in. We drove to the bungee jumping site, a makeshift platform perched precariously over a gorge. I was shaking by the time we arrived, my mind racing with every possible scenario. What if the cord snapped? What if I miscalculated the jump? What if I didn't pull the parachute in time? The instructor was doing a safety briefing, but I couldn't focus on his words, sounds drowning in my panic. Before I knew it, I found myself suited up, my heart drumming in my ears like a war song. Waiting my turn was less like anticipation and more like impending doom. I watched as one by one, my friends leapt off the edge, joyful screams echoing as they fell, the exhilarated rush of free falling before the cord tugged them back. Each jump made my fear swell to catastrophic levels, and I was seriously reconsidering my life choices. When I heard my name called, it felt like I had stepped into an alternate reality. I wanted to run, to escape, but one look at my friends' encouraging smiles steeled my resolve. I could do this, I had to do this. I stepped onto the platform, the wood creaking ominously under my weight, my knees nearly buckling. I looked down. That was the moment I felt my heart drop. The sheer drop of the gorge was terrifying, the ground far below looking like a dark void. My stomach twisted painfully, and I suddenly regretted everything. The instructor counted down, 3, 2, 1. Jump. But not just jump, I had to face my sober fear. For a split second, I froze. It felt like the world stopped spinning. Then a surge of adrenaline coursed through me. I leapt. The sensation of falling was both liberating and horrifying, like being snatched away from reality. The ground rushed up to meet me, the wind roaring in my ears as screams escaped my mouth, though I couldn't tell if they were cries of terror or exhilaration. I felt the bungee cord snap tight, yanking me back up, and in that moment, all my fears twisted into something else entirely. I was alive, I was free, and as the cord pulled me bouncing back up toward the sky, I laughed, truly laughed, for the first time in years, a contagious, shattered laugh filled with disbelief. When I was finally lowered back onto the solid ground, I was both disoriented and elated. My friends rushed up to me, their cheers vibrating through me like a living pulse, and I could see the joy reflected in their eyes, as if I had just transcended some ancient rite of passage. I had faced my fears, laughed in their face, and won. Or so I thought. We spent the rest of the day basking in that thrill, exchanging tales of bravery, but as night fell, that lingering sense of triumph shifted into something darker. We gathered around a campfire, the woods alive with rustling leaves and distant animal calls. Jokes turned to stories, and soon someone mentioned urban legends about the woods we were in, tales of mysterious figures, strange noises, and an ancient curse. I laughed it off at first, but the shadows danced unsettlingly around us, and my anxiety returned. It felt almost as if something was watching us, lurking in the darkness, stirring that primal fear deep within my gut. Just as I started to feel paranoid, one of my friends suggested taking another leap, this time, into the waters below at the gorge. Rational thought fled. After all, I wasn't afraid of water. I was anxious, but after bungee jumping, I was somehow emboldened despite the creeping dread when we approached the edge. Climbing down was easy, almost thrilling, but standing on a slippery rock, looking down at the dark waters, I felt my earlier courage drain from me. "Just jump," someone shouted, and before I could think it over, I leapt yet again. This time, there was no bungee to catch me. The water embraced me instantly, and I was lost in the depths. It felt like slipping into another world, the coldness wrapping around me like a shroud, and I couldn't tell which way was up. Panic clawed at my throat as I thrashed, desperate to break the surface. And then I saw it. A shadow beneath the water, something moving, and all that courage slipped away, replaced by raw terror. I didn't care about the others, I just wanted to survive. I pushed upwards frantically until my head broke the surface, gasping for breath, but the laughter and cheers were gone. The woods felt swallowed by silence. I turned, desperate for reassurance, and that's when I saw the figure, a dark silhouette watching me from the shore. My heart skipped a beat, panic bubbling up once more. I tried to yell for my friends, but my voice came out as a strangled cry. They were gone, the laughter fading into the background. The figure remained, unmoving. With every second, dread coiled tighter in my chest. It just stood there, watching me, and then, impossibly, it began to approach the water. I swam frantically toward the rocks, desperation feeding my energy, but as I clambered onto the shore, dread shot through me like electricity. Whatever was out there wasn't human, not entirely. As I turned to look again, the figure was gone. I stumbled back to the camp, heart racing, and found my friends gathered by the fire with confused expressions, and it felt like an eternity passed since I had jumped. "Where were you?" Mark asked, his brow furrowed. I tried to tell them what I saw, but the words wouldn't form, my tongue too dry, the sense of disbelief crushing. They laughed it off again, but I found no comfort in their words this time. I scanned the woods, feeling eyes on me, and the fire flickered, casting fleeting shadows that seemed to shape into the form of that figure, taunting me in my grip of fear. Night crawled on, and I couldn't shake the anxiety. I finally convinced my friends to pack up and head home, feeling the discomfort settle in my bones. As much as I had faced my fear, something dark had followed me back from that gorge, lurking in those trees. Days have passed, and the thrill of what I did has turned into an unsettling dread. I still wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, heart racing, replaying the moment over and over like a twisted nightmare. I hear whispers in the dark, feel shadows creeping across my walls, and sometimes, I catch glimpses of a shape that edges closer when I least expect it. I can't shake the feeling that whatever I faced that night, whatever I provoked, is still out there, waiting. So, if you ever find yourself in the woods near a gorge, searching for a thrill, remember that sometimes, facing your fears can expose you to something darker. It's a lesson I learned too late, and no extreme sport, not even a bungee jump, can ever save you from what lurks beneath the surface. I can't sleep, so I guess I'll share my story. It's about honesty, or at least what happens when you don't practice it. A few months ago, I was living in a sleepy little town that nobody would remember from a postcard. I was just your average guy, working a dead-end job at a convenience store, stuffing my days with mundane routines and my evenings with binge-watching whatever was trending on Netflix. But one dull Thursday evening, my life turned upside down when I met him, an older gentleman, scruffy but sharp-eyed, who walked into the store an hour before closing. My shift was almost over, and I was ready to close up. I quickly scanned him as he wandered through the aisles, picking up random snacks and looking genuinely confused. I could tell he wasn't from around here. He bought an odd mix of chips and a single cold soda. As he approached the counter, I noticed he was holding out something in his hand. It was a glossy card marked with a symbol I couldn't recognize, a circle with intricate patterns. He placed it on the counter, and his voice was gravelly but calm as he asked, "Do you believe in second chances?" He caught me off guard. I replied, "Sure. Why do you ask?" He leaned in closer, and I could smell the combination of fresh air and something else, something ancient, like the earth after a heavy rain. "I have something to show you that might change your perspective on honesty." I couldn't help but feel a shiver creep down my spine. I should have just scanned his items and sent him on his way, but curiosity got the better of me. "What do you mean?" I asked. Instead of answering, he pulled a small, frayed notebook out of his jacket pocket, opening to the middle page which was filled with an elegant script. He held it up and said, "This is the Dictionary of Truths. It tells you what honesty looks like, but more importantly, what happens when you lie." I chuckled uncomfortably, thinking this was just some sort of weird prank or sales pitch, but something in his eyes told me he was dead serious. I glanced at the card one last time and shrugged. "Do I get a copy?" I joked. "No, but you're welcome to borrow it," he replied, scribbling his phone number at the bottom of the page. "Call me if you're ever interested." Before I could respond, he turned and walked out of the store, leaving me completely bewildered. For the rest of my shift, that encounter played on loop in my mind. Who was that guy? And what was that notebook? I shook it off, but when I got home, I found myself flipping through the Notes app on my phone, staring at the number he'd given me. I felt like an idiot for even considering calling him. A week passed, and life resumed as normal, but a nagging unease settled in. I wondered about the peculiar old man and his strange proposition. Finally, late one night, I decided to just bite the bullet. I dialed the number, and to my surprise, he answered almost immediately. "You called," he said. His voice was calm but carried a weight to it. "You're interested?" "I guess I am," I replied hesitantly. "What's this thing about the Dictionary of Truths?" There was a long pause, and just as I was about to hang up, he said, "Meet me at the old oak tree on Maple Street. Midnight tomorrow." The urgency in his voice sent chills down my spine. I didn't know if I should go, but something deep inside urged me to follow through. The next night, I stood beneath the sprawling branches of the oak, my heart racing. The night was eerily silent, and I felt like I was being watched. Suddenly, emerging from the shadows, the old man approached, the same notebook in hand. "Let's begin," he said, flipping the pages until he landed on one with a list titled "Consequences of Lies." The words felt heavy, loaded with meanings I couldn't yet grasp. He started recounting stories from the pages, incidents where a small lie spiraled out of control until someone was left destroyed in its wake. One story stuck with me. It was about a family man who had lied about a job. In trying to impress his friends, he claimed he was doing well financially, but when the truth emerged, it shattered his home. The deception led to distrust. The wife left, taking the kids. It sounded like a cliché, but something twisted in my gut told me this wasn't just a story. The old man looked at me and said, "Every lie is a thread, and with enough threads, you weave a tapestry of destruction." I wanted to laugh it off, but as he spoke, I felt that familiar pit forming in my stomach. I walked away that night feeling more confused than enlightened. I didn't want to believe what he was saying, but the ideas clung to me. That next week, I encountered scenarios where dishonesty seemed tempting, like lying to my boss about why I needed a week off or fabricating an excuse to break plans with a friend. Each time, I could hear the old man's voice echoing in my mind, warning me against the consequences. One night, ironically, I was at a bar with friends. They dared me to exaggerate how well things were going in my life just for fun. I was tipsy and felt bold, so I started weaving a tale about a promotion and a new car. I lit up as I shared, feeding off their laughter, but as I spoke, I saw the flicker of concern in the eyes of my childhood friend, Sarah. She knew me better than anyone. The moment the night ended, she pulled me aside. "You're lying, aren't you?" she said softly. A flood of guilt crashed over me. I could have confessed then, but rather, I shrugged and laughed, telling her it was all in good fun. As the days turned into weeks, I felt my act of dishonesty festering. I noticed I was starting to isolate myself from my friends, growing anxious and withdrawn. I ignored Sarah when she reached out. I made excuses. I buried myself in work and avoided social situations. It all came to a head one night when I bumped into the old man again outside the store. His eyes met mine, and I felt a pang of shame. "You've been dishonest," he said, and it wasn't phrased as a question. I stammered, trying to defend myself, but he cut me off. "You're lying to everyone, including yourself. If you don't change, the lies will catch up to you, and they will hurt." I was furious. I felt trapped, his words hanging like an anvil over my head. But deep down, I knew he was right. I walked back home that night, anger morphing into dread. I finally picked up the phone and tried to call Sarah, but what if she didn't want to hear from me? What if I had already ruined things with her? The old man's words haunted me, yet I could feel something breaking open, a crack allowing light to seep through. As I sat in my room, I felt compelled to reach out and tell Sarah the truth about everything I'd been hiding. I stared at the phone, tracing my fingers over the screen, but then doubt swallowed me whole again. The nagging sense of inadequacy surged within me. I could either hold on to the safe illusion I created, my fabricated perfect life, or embrace the fear of vulnerability. That battle went on for weeks until one evening, I found myself in front of my bathroom mirror, shaking. The toll was nearing its breaking point. I felt unworthy of my friendships, convinced they'd all abandon me if they knew who I truly was. That's when I caught a glimpse of the worn pages of that notebook. After days of ignoring it, I finally picked it up from its hiding spot, where I had tossed it. I began flipping through its pages, each one dripping with honest accounts of people who suffered because of lies, the emotional scars that followed them. I felt like I was facing my own shortcomings, each page a reflection of my fears. Tentatively, I dialed Sarah's number, my heart racing in despair as the phone rang. "Hey," she answered, sounding cheerful, but I could hear the hint of caution in her tone when she recognized my voice. "What's up?" I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything I was holding. "Can we talk?" I felt the silence stretch like an eternity before she finally said, "Sure. I'm here." I spilled everything, the lies, my fears, how I felt like I was becoming someone I didn't recognize. As I spoke, I felt something shift, a release, a sense of freedom. It felt surreal, like I was shedding skin. She was there, listening, her voice soft and understanding. In that moment, I realized honesty wasn't a weakness, it was a bridge back to my true self. When I finished, there was silence on the other end. My heart raced until she finally whispered, "Thank you for telling me." The relief was palpable, and I could feel bonds reweaving, foundations being rebuilt. It was the hardest conversation I ever had, but I learned that honesty was indeed the hardest thing to face, but it was also the most liberating. After that night, I found myself reaching out to others, mending relationships that had frayed under my web of lies. The old man disappeared from my life, but his words lingered, echoing in my actions. I eventually learned to embrace vulnerability, to show my true self without the masks of deception. So, if you ever find yourself tempted to weave a story that isn't true, just know that honesty can be a hard journey, but the pain of lying is a far greater burden. I wish I could thank that old man, but sometimes I think he was simply a stranger who was meant to guide me through a dark time. So remember this, honesty might not always be easy, but it can set you free in ways you never imagined. I've always been the kind of person who finds comfort in routine, so when something jolted me out of my norm, I didn't handle it well. It started last fall, an ordinary October morning, when I discovered I had an empty house. My mother passed away unexpectedly, and I was left alone in the world. Yes, I had friends, my work, and the distractions that come with being an adult, but with her gone, I felt sharply the absence of guidance, love, and support. Somehow, the house felt haunted, filled with whispers of memories that now echoed only to mock me. I'll admit, I tried to avoid the overwhelming grief with a slew of distractions, which only led to guilt piled atop sorrow. One evening, during a particularly vivid wave of melancholy, I grabbed a flashlight and headed into the basement. I was looking for something to keep me busy. The basement had always been a place of mystery, filled with boxes of my mother's life, dusty furniture, and a faint, musty smell that teased at forgotten stories. As I rummaged through stacks of cardboard boxes marked keep or toss, something caught my eye. There was an old, unmarked box buried beneath the rest. It had no label, just layers of dust. Out of curiosity, I pulled it out, and as I opened it, I found a collection of old journals, each one yellowed and fragile. There was a strange sense of reverence as I handled them. It felt like I was touching a part of her that was preserved, something I would have plunged into if I hadn't been so afraid of what I might find. The first journal was filled with entries from her teenage years, detailing crushes, friendships, and dreams, a world where I could see glimpses of her before I ever existed, a time when she forged her identity independent of her role as a mother. I felt both exhilarated and devastated as I flipped through, each word pulling me deeper into the nostalgia of a life I was now disconnected from. I spent hours lost in her thoughts, laughing at her awkward drawings and crying at the raw energy in her words. However, it wasn't the light-hearted moments that struck me, it was the darker entries that tugged the most at my heartstrings, the discussions of her struggles with self-worth, anxiety, and moments of despair. Each page painted a picture of someone not so different from me. The realization hit as I read, she had faced her own demons and stumbled but always found a way to stand back up. I needed to honor that sense of resilience, to keep her spirit alive in my heart instead of choosing to drown in sadness. As the weeks went by, I immersed myself in the journals. They became a lifeline during my darkest moments. Each entry inspired me to confront my grief, urging me to pull myself out of the abyss. One night, after reading about her creative passions, from painting to writing, it dawned on me that I had my own creative outlets I'd abandoned over the years. So, I made a decision. I would channel my energy into creating something for her, something that reflected her spirit and encouraged others who might be lost, just as I was. I bought a canvas and began painting. Sitting there, brush in hand, I struggled at first. The type of anxiety my mother often wrote about crept back in, whispering doubts that stung like vinegar. I was convinced I was incapable of doing anything worthwhile. Yet, with each stroke, a cathartic release undid the knots tied inside me. As colors swirled and shapes took form, I let go of the perfect image I had in my mind. Instead, I embraced the chaotic beauty that happened when I allowed myself to feel. The act of creating was awkward yet liberating, and I found solace in the process, an echo of my mother's own journeys into art that she sometimes documented in her journals. That night turned into many more, and as weeks passed, my easel became a source of healing. I painted a series of pieces that expressed my grief, my fear, and ultimately, my hope. They were a tribute to my mother and a reflection of the strength found in vulnerability. Each creation revealed layers of me I had long buried beneath mundane routines of life. Together, they told a story not just of loss but of the emergence of a new self, the child learning to walk without the guiding hand of its parent. When I finally felt ready, I decided to capture my journey in a blog, sharing my mother's stories alongside my own. I wanted people to know they weren't alone in their struggles. The first post went live on a chilly December evening, my heart racing as I hit publish. The blog gained traction, and what began as a simple personal project morphed into a vibrant community of individuals sharing their own stories of grief and resilience. The comments poured in, messages of gratitude, confessions of their own battles, and stories of triumph. People thanked me for being vulnerable, for showing them that it was okay to fall apart and rebuild. It was everything I had hoped for and more. The feeling of helping others began softening the sharp edges of my own pain. And then something unexpected happened. I was invited to speak at a community event about mental health and the importance of sharing our stories. Back then, I might have rejected the idea, shy and overwhelmed, but instead, I found myself accepting with a mix of terror and excitement. With each passing day leading up to the event, I tapped into the strength that my mother had shown me, the same strength that had come through in her journals. I wrote out my speech, intertwining her words with my narrative. Finally, the night came, and as I stood before a crowd, my hands shaking, I took a deep breath and began to speak. The words poured out, the stories flowed, and for the first time, I felt a sense of empowerment. Each person in that room became a part of my journey, a vital piece of a larger tapestry. After sharing my story, I saw people in the audience nodding, reaching for tissues, some even whispering their own truths as the gravity of connection settled in the air. That night, something changed in me. I realized that overcoming my personal challenge wasn't just a solitary journey, but a communal experience. My mother's legacy continued through me, connecting us all in a shared struggle. As I left the venue, a woman approached me, tears in her eyes. She thanked me for sharing my story, recounting her own struggles with grief and loss, and how my words encouraged her to embrace her past instead of running from it. I hugged her, feeling the heat of our collective pain, and in that moment, I knew I had transformed my grief into a strength that not only served me but offered hope to others. Now, every October rolls around, and I honor my mother's memory differently. I host a small gathering each year, with art, stories, and shared laughter. We celebrate not just loss, but resilience, proving that we can emerge stronger through our struggles, and that the chains of grief can forge new beginnings. I learned to confront my demons head-on and to never shy away from the uncomfortable truths. So, if you ever find yourself overwhelmed by darkness, remember, there's a light within the stories we carry, and strength lies in embracing our vulnerabilities. Every challenge faced is a step toward deeper connections, both with ourselves and with others. Like the journals I discovered, our experiences may hold the keys to transforming pain into purpose, so share your story. You never know who will find strength in your words. Entitled Mom Demands I Give Her My Wedding Dress, Sparks Fly. It all started with my wedding dress. It was a beautiful, flowing gown that I had dreamed of since I was a little girl, and now it was finally mine, hanging in my closet, ready for the big day. My fiancé, Jake, and I were set to get married in just a few weeks, and I was both excited and nervous. We had planned a small, intimate ceremony with close family and friends, a reflection of our personalities. However, the tranquility of my wedding preparations was shattered the day my future mother-in-law, Linda, invited me over for coffee. I walked into her house, full of excitement and trepidation, and found her sitting at the kitchen table with a big smile on her face. "I'm so glad you could come, sweetie," she exclaimed, her voice cheerful. We chatted about wedding plans and decorations, but then she dropped a bombshell. "You know, I've been thinking about my daughter-in-law's dress," she began, her tone suddenly shifting. "I'm sure you know how important it is for her to look stunning on her special day, too." I nodded, confused. Linda had a daughter, Emily, who was getting married the following year. I had assumed she wanted to help me with ideas or plans for her wedding, but I had no idea where this was going. "I've been looking at some dresses for her, but nothing seems to compare to yours," she continued, her eyes gleaming with an idea. "I was wondering if you would consider letting Emily borrow your dress for her wedding." I stared at her, shocked. I'm sorry, but this dress means a lot to me. I've been dreaming about it for years, and it's custom made for my body. I can't just let someone else wear it." Linda's smile faltered, and her expression morphed into something more demanding. "But it would mean so much to her. She deserves to have the perfect dress just like you do. And let's be honest, it's not like you'll need it after your wedding, right?" My heart raced. "I mean, yes, I won't wear it again, but that doesn't mean I want to hand it over to someone else. It's special to me." Linda leaned closer, lowering her voice as if we were sharing a secret. "You don't understand how much this means to our family. This is about keeping traditions alive, and wearing family dresses is part of that. I thought you'd be more understanding." My stomach churned at the thought of being coerced into giving away something so precious. "I get that traditions are important, but I still want to keep my dress. This is my wedding, and I deserve to have my moment." Linda's demeanor shifted, and I could see anger flicker behind her eyes. "How selfish of you. You're thinking only about yourself. Don't you want to make Emily happy? She looks up to you, you know." I felt my cheeks burn with frustration. "I'm sorry, but this isn't about being selfish. I just can't give my wedding dress to someone else. That's not how this works." Linda huffed, crossing her arms. "I guess you don't care about family, then. You're just thinking about your own desires. I thought you were better than this." I was taken aback by her words. My heart raced as I stood my ground. I care about my family, but I also care about my feelings and my wedding. This dress is a huge part of my day. She rolled her eyes, clearly unwilling to listen to my perspective. "You'll regret this decision. Emily deserves the best, and it's not like you have a personal attachment to the dress. You won't wear it again, so what's the big deal?" My anger flared. "That's not the point. I won't wear it again, but that doesn't mean I should just give it away. It's mine." Linda's eyes narrowed as if she was calculating her next move. "If you won't let her wear it, I'll just have to make a point to tell Jake how unsupportive you're being. Maybe he'll change his mind about marrying you." The words hung in the air, and I felt a wave of fury wash over me. "You wouldn't dare," I exclaimed, shocked that she would stoop so low. "This isn't about Jake. It's about my dress and my wedding." I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. "If you want to play these games, go ahead. I'll tell him exactly what you've been saying about this dress. Linda's expression hardened. Go ahead. But don't be surprised when you lose him. Family is everything, and you clearly don't understand that. I turned on my heel and stormed out of her house, my mind racing with a mix of anger and disbelief. I couldn't believe she had the audacity to demand my wedding dress, to turn it into a family obligation. I drove home in a daze, wondering if I had crossed a line by standing up for myself. When I got home, I found Jake lounging on the couch, completely oblivious to the turmoil I had just experienced. I flopped down next to him, my heart still racing. Hey, how was your day? He asked casually. You wouldn't believe what just happened, I said, my voice shaking with frustration. I recounted the whole story about Linda and her outrageous request, and to my surprise, Jake's expression shifted from casual to serious. That's ridiculous. Your dress is yours, and no one should demand it from you, especially not my mom. I felt a wave of relief wash over me as he spoke. I know. It feels like she's trying to manipulate me into giving it up. Jake frowned, his brow furrowing. You should talk to her. Set some boundaries. She shouldn't be threatening you like that. I nodded, knowing he was right. But part of me was terrified of what would happen next. I took a deep breath and resolved to confront Linda again, this time with Jake by my side. A few days later, we decided to invite her over for dinner. I was a bundle of nerves, pacing around the kitchen as I prepared the meal. When she arrived, the tension in the air was palpable. Hi, Linda, I greeted her, forcing a smile. Thanks for coming over. She entered with an air of confidence, a smile plastered on her face, as if everything was normal. Of course. I hope you've changed your mind about the dress, she said sweetly. I just know how much Emily would love it. Jake shot me a look of support as we sat down to dinner. I took a deep breath, ready to address the elephant in the room. Actually, Linda, we need to talk about the dress again, I said firmly. Her smile faltered, and I could see the tension in her shoulders. Oh. I thought we were past that. We're not, I replied, keeping my voice steady. I feel like you've crossed a line by demanding my wedding dress and trying to manipulate me into giving it up. Linda's expression hardened, and I could feel the atmosphere in the room shift. Manipulate you? I was only trying to help my daughter. It's a family tradition. A tradition shouldn't come at the cost of someone else's happiness. This is my wedding dress, and I won't be giving it away. I love it, and it means a lot to me. Jake chimed in, his voice strong. Mom, this is about respect. You can't just demand things from her because you think it's for the family. Linda's face flushed with anger, and I could see the frustration boiling over. You both are being unreasonable. It's just a dress. I felt a spark of anger rise in me. It's not just a dress. It's a symbol of my love for Jake and the commitment we're making. It's about my moment, my experience. Linda's voice rose, and I could feel the tension escalating. You're being selfish. You're ruining our family's tradition. I could see the sparks flying between us, and the room felt charged with emotions. No, you're ruining our relationship with your entitled demands. I shot back, my heart pounding in my chest. This isn't just about Emily, it's about you trying to control everything. Linda glared at me, her eyes filled with fury. If you don't care about family, then maybe you shouldn't be marrying my son. I felt my heart drop at her words. You don't get to decide who Jake marries. He chose me. The tension reached a boiling point, and I could feel the air crackling around us. This conversation is over, Linda shouted, standing up abruptly. I won't be a part of this nonsense. With that, she stormed out of our house, leaving Jake and me in stunned silence. I felt a mix of anger and relief wash over me as I processed what had just happened. Are you okay? Jake asked, his eyes searching mine. I nodded, feeling empowered. I am. I stood my ground, and I won't let her control me. Jake wrapped his arms around me, and I felt a sense of calm settle in. I'm proud of you for speaking up, he said softly. You deserve to have your day and your dress. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, Linda didn't reach out, and I wasn't surprised. I knew I had made my stand, and I felt good about it. The wedding day arrived, and as I slipped into my dress, I couldn't help but feel beautiful and, the moment I realized I was in the wrong, a lesson learned. The moment I realized I was in the wrong is one of those memories I'll never forget. A crystal clear image burned into my mind, and though it's painful, I think I needed to go through it to finally understand the kind of person I was becoming. It all started innocently enough, with me, a typical young professional who thought he had everything figured out, from his career to his relationships. I'd landed my dream job at a high-profile consulting firm right out of college, a role I'd worked insanely hard to get, pouring every ounce of my time and energy into the endless projects and presentations. My job, as exciting and intense as it was, quickly became the center of my life, to the point where I started seeing everything and everyone around me as mere background noise. Friends would invite me out, but I'd decline, using work as an excuse, or when I did show up, I'd be on my phone half the time, answering emails, giving off that busy and important vibe that I'd grown to believe defined me. My family, too, got the short end of the stick. I'd skip family gatherings, birthdays, holidays, all under the guise of having too much going on and big things in the pipeline. If I'm being honest, though, I wasn't just busy, I was disconnected, isolated even, slowly pushing everyone away while telling myself I was on the right track. At first, I didn't even notice the subtle toll this was taking on my relationships. I chalked it up to growing up, being ambitious, going after my dreams. But over time, I began to feel this emptiness creeping in, a hollow feeling I tried to ignore by throwing myself even harder into work, filling my life with numbers, presentations, and meetings. Then, one day, my best friend, Danny, called me, saying he was going through a rough patch and needed to talk. Danny and I went way back to college days, but recently, our connection had faded. When he called, I was right in the middle of preparing for a huge pitch, and I could barely hide my irritation when he asked if we could grab a drink. I didn't even let him finish before I shot him down, claiming I had too much on my plate. He paused on the line, sighed, and said he understood, even though I could hear the disappointment in his voice. Later that night, I found myself replaying that conversation, something nagging at me, a tiny voice whispering that I'd messed up, but I brushed it off, telling myself Danny would get over it. A few weeks later, my sister asked me to come home for a family dinner, something we hadn't done in ages. She even mentioned how much my parents missed me, especially Mom, who'd been asking about me nonstop. I promised I'd be there, but when the day came, I found myself stuck in the office, buried under another pile of deadlines. I didn't even call to let them know I wouldn't make it. I told myself they'd understand, that they knew how demanding my job was. But then, something happened that shattered the illusion I'd built around myself. I came into work one morning, just like any other day, to find out that a young colleague of mine had been let go, someone I'd mentored, actually, someone who looked up to me and had reminded me a lot of my younger self. I couldn't understand why they'd cut him loose. He was talented, smart, and dedicated, but apparently, the firm had been making efficiency improvements, a sterile way of saying they'd cut costs by letting people go. It hit me harder than I expected, but I buried that discomfort too, telling myself that's just the way things are in our field. That same night, as I was walking to my car, I saw Danny waiting outside the office building. He looked different, pale, tired, almost haunted. I was about to tell him I was busy, that we'd catch up another time, but he cut me off, saying we needed to talk now. Reluctantly, I agreed, and we went to a nearby coffee shop, where he sat down and finally opened up. Danny told me that his dad had been diagnosed with cancer a few months back, and he'd been struggling to cope, feeling like his whole world was crumbling. He said he'd tried to reach out, tried to talk to me, but every time he called, I'd been too busy, too wrapped up in my own world. He even reminded me of that phone call a few weeks back, the one I'd brushed off so easily, and as he spoke, I felt a sickening realization settle over me. I'd been so focused on myself, on my goals, on my career, that I'd failed to notice the people around me were struggling, hurting, needing me. It wasn't just Danny, either. I thought about all the missed calls from my mom, the invitations I'd ignored, the friends I'd pushed away, all because I was convinced my work was more important than anything else. Sitting there, listening to Danny pour his heart out, I felt like the worst kind of friend. I wanted to apologize, to make it right somehow, but I didn't even know where to start. That night, I went home and stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep, haunted by the person I'd become. The next day, I called my mom and apologized, explaining everything, and for the first time in years, I heard her cry over the phone. I took a few days off work, drove home, and spent time with my family, reconnecting, mending the wounds I'd caused. It was awkward at first, like relearning how to be close to them, but slowly, it felt like coming back to life. I met up with Danny, too, and promised him that I'd be there, no matter what. And for the first time, I started setting boundaries at work, prioritizing the people who mattered instead of treating them like an afterthought. I learned a hard lesson from that experience, a lesson about what truly matters in life, and it wasn't the job, the title, or the money. It was the people, the relationships, the connections that make life meaningful. Looking back, I'm grateful for that rude awakening, as painful as it was, because without it, I might never have realized how wrong I was. I always fancied myself a tough guy. Growing up in a rough neighborhood, you either learned to stand your ground or became a victim of someone else's. I took pride in my ability to shrug off pain, whether it was physical or emotional. I was indifferent, you see, a wall of cynicism built around my heart. I believed that vulnerability was for the weak. Life had taught me that everyone was out for themselves, and no amount of empathy could change that. But one chilly October evening, while walking home from my dead-end job at the corner store, an encounter turned my world upside down. The sun dipped below the horizon, and shadows grew long as I approached a familiar alleyway. I did the usual check for suspicious figures lurking in the darkness. That's when I heard it, a quiet sobbing, muffled but unmistakable. Curiosity got the better of me, leading me to the mouth of the alley. It was then I saw her, a teenage girl curled up against the brick wall, her knees pulled to her chest, tears streaming down her face. She was trembling, and I could feel an unwelcome twinge of unease crawling up my spine. Part of me wanted to turn away, chalk it up to some other kid's bad night, but instead, I found myself taking a tentative step closer. "Hey," I said awkwardly, immediately regretting the words. "Are you okay?" The girl looked up, her eyes wide and glazed, as if she hadn't expected anyone to notice her. "No," she croaked, her voice cracking like fragile glass. My gut tightened at the rawness of her pain, but the words barely registered as I tried to process what was happening. "What happened?" I asked, and to my absolute surprise, she started to pour her heart out. Her story tumbled from her lips in an avalanche of broken dreams and despair. She had just lost her mother to cancer and was forced to live with an abusive uncle who took every opportunity to reinforce how worthless she was. I stood there, feeling like a statue, my tough guy facade crumbling. It was hard to understand the pain she described. I had never been thrust into such darkness. While the stories I'd heard from friends about their families seemed trite compared to what this girl was enduring, something in me broke open. As she spoke, my mind whirled with fragmented memories of insults I had hurled to toughen people up, taunts I had ridiculed those vulnerable to fit in. My heart raced, and for the first time, I felt that crushing weight of empathy, the understanding of someone else's suffering resonating painfully in my own chest. I squatted down, trying to meet her gaze. "You're not worthless," I murmured, the words soft and awkward. "You're not alone, either." I expected her to scoff or roll her eyes, but instead, her tears flowed again, making her face glisten in the dim light. Something inside me shifted. I was no longer just an observer in her pain. I was a participant. We talked for what seemed like hours while the autumn air bit at our exposed skin. We shared stories, bonded over the cruel nature of the world, and by the time I left the alley, I felt a sense of weightlessness, the heaviness of my cynicism replaced by some small ember of understanding. Over the next few weeks, I couldn't shake the memory of that girl. I started to hesitate when ready to dismiss others' pain, considering instead how someone else might perceive their struggles. My coworkers noticed the slight change in me when I handed them the book I bought for a struggling friend. I started inviting friends out that I typically wouldn't have bothered. I wanted to do something meaningful for others, carrying the same compassion I found for that young girl into my everyday life. I often returned to that alley. I hoped to see her again. It didn't take long before I did. A week later, I found her sitting in the same spot. This time, she lit up at the sight of me. "You came back." Her face split into a smile, and I realized then how rare that was, considering the depths of her despair. I sat down next to her, and we picked up our conversations where we left off. I learned she loved drawing, an escape from her reality, yet her uncle had ripped that away by tossing her sketchbook in the trash. So, I bought her a new one. The next week, I brought her some colored pencils. She giggled through tears, and that sound was like music. Each time I returned, the laughter grew louder, the heaviness of her life felt lighter. She confided in me about her dreams, and I opened up about mine, a lifetime spent shielding myself from heartache and hiding my own fears beneath bravado. It was during that third visit that the shadows stretched long, and as we shared yet another deep laugh, I saw a figure at the alley mouth. The menacing build of her uncle loomed in the faint glow of the street light. My stomach dropped as I realized he was searching for her. My instinct kicked in. I grabbed her hand before she could speak. "Come with me," I whispered urgently, and we dashed deeper into the shadows, away from the growing threat. My heart raced, fear coursing through my veins. We zigzagged through alleyways until I led her to my tiny apartment in the next neighborhood over. She was terrified, yet trusting, and I couldn't help but feel the weight of her trust resting squarely upon my shoulders. For the next few days, she stayed with me as anxiety morphed into a new routine. I found myself protecting her more than I knew how, knowing by then the battles she faced. But all my efforts lay bare in stark contrast to the horrors waiting beyond my door. One cold evening, as we watched old cartoons and shared laughs, I heard an insistent banging. My heart sank. I looked at her, her eyes wide with terror. "It's him," she whispered. I rushed to the door, but the pounding continued, relentless. I told her to hide. She ducked into the bathroom, fear plastered across her face. I knew if he got in, he'd hurt both of us. I faced what courage I could muster, opened the door, and was met by her uncle's furious and bloated visage. "Where is she?" he spat, his eyes wild with rage. I stood my ground, but something in me felt small against the fury radiating from him. He shoved past me, and I instinctively lunged forward, desperate to protect her. The adrenaline surged through me, and a primal need to defend arose. I took a wild swing, hitting him squarely in the nose. He staggered back, momentarily disoriented, but it wasn't enough. He lunged at me, fist moving like a whirlwind. The next moments turned into a blur of chaos. We grappled, the dull ache of pain seeping into my muscles as I slammed against the wall, trying to keep him from reaching her. Each punch exchanged felt like snapping twigs in a silence shattered by muffled fear. It was a primal dance of brutality and instinct, and as he swung again, the sickening crunch of his hand against my ribs shattered my focus. Every blow that landed resonated with guilt. The thought of her seeing me become what I despised held me captive. But then I remembered her laughter, her dreams, her vulnerability intertwined with my newfound empathy. It fueled my resolve, surging through the pain. I drove myself forward, pushing him back, surprise etching across his face as I landed another hit. And finally, he stumbled back, gasping in a mix of shock and fury. "You think you can keep her?" he screamed, before taking off into the night. Breathing heavily, I turned to the bathroom. "It's okay. It's over." But when I opened the door, she wasn't there. Panic cascaded over me, a wave of despair flooding my heart. I searched frantically, calling her name, only to hear nothing but echoing silence. My worst fears spun out of control as the minutes felt like hours. I stumbled back into the living room, heart racing, when the door creaked back. I whipped my head up to find her standing there, trembling yet determined, clutching a small backpack filled with her drawings. "I'm leaving," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. My heart shattered. "No, you don't have to," I pleaded, the empathy I had found burning hotter than ever. "Stay. We can fight this together." But she shook her head, the weight of her fears anchoring her spirit. "You've been so kind, but I can't let him find me. You deserve better. You can't fight this battle for me." She turned to leave, her silhouette framed by the dim light of the hallway. And in that moment, I learned the hardest lesson of all, the depths of sacrifice, how empathy can compel someone to let go, to let a small flame flicker out for the greater good. I stood paralyzed with grief as she vanished, the intimacy we had built now a haunting memory. Days passed, then weeks. Life resumed its predictable course, but I carried her memories with me, each encounter echoing faintly in my heart. I still walked those alleyways, haunted by her absence, the harsh reality of her struggles serving as a constant reminder of my failure to protect someone so deserving. But through that pain, I learned something ineffably valuable, that no act of empathy is ever wasted. As I forged deeper connections with those around me, I began to understand humanity on a level I had never reached before, using that experience to reach others suffering in silence. I became their strength, their voice. Empathy had etched itself into my soul, a guiding light against the encroaching darkness. It taught me that our struggles are never in vain, that each connection, painful or beautiful, is a step toward healing. And as I closed my eyes each night, I hoped that wherever she was finding a sense of hope that I could one day share with others. The importance of empathy hadn't just changed me, it had saved me, marking the beginning of my journey toward not just understanding pain, but conquering it together.